and that's all the news. So what was your question, Lee?
So whirlpooling for trub removal. So I've managed to get a pump, and I can pull a bit of a whirlpool, and then you chill it down, right? And obviously the whirlpool's doing a really good, like that recirculation is making the chilling a lot quicker. But in terms of trub removal, when you then remove I use a copper coil, you take that out. Should I whirlpool after that?
Yeah.
And if so, for how long? And then when I turn off the whirlpool, do you then wait a while before you pump it to the fermenter? So what do you do once you finish the cooling? Do you keep the whirlpool on? What do you do then?
What did you used to do, Lee?
I used to not have a whirlpool and I'd go and have a beer, and then I'd drain it out through a tap and then straight into the fermenter, and then I'd hoik 40 kilos up into my fridge, which was probably going to break my back as it gets older. So now I pump it over. So yeah, I don't know what to do now.
Are you using the whirlpool to add hop additions as well?
Well, sometimes, but
is it
you know, that bit I can do. It's the bit, how do you then let it settle out? What do you do? I have done, but today I didn't pull, for example.
The whirlpooling is supposed to
my whirlpool goes the other way, Paul.
Is it? Okay, goes that way then.
That's better, yeah.
It's supposed to create a cone in the middle of the pot, isn't it? Right, and you should be then with drawing from the side. But if you've got a coil sitting in the middle of it, it's going to disrupt the flow. So you would probably. Yeah. You said you've got a recirculating pump doing this, is it? Or
so then I can take the coil out. So that's what I'm saying. Should I then just recirculate for a while, and if so, how long? I did it today. I put some pellets in, and I did it for about 20 minutes, and if I looked in the top, it looked exactly the same at the start as the end. There was still trub floating quite close to the surface. But yeah, that's my question. What do you do?
I leave it for I take the coil out, and then I keep going for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, exactly like I say, and then I switch off the pump, and if I can, I bugger off for an hour then. I just let the whole lot settle, and then I drain out, and I've probably got an exit which is maybe 1.5 inches above the bottom of the pot, and then I pump across slowly. The first pint is definitely cloudy, and then I pump across slowly, and then just for the last maybe 5 litres, I'll watch it as it goes down, and almost inevitably you end up with a lovely pyramid of hops. But then there's trub all around it, and the trub moves very quickly, and you'll start sucking trub pretty speedily towards the end. But the hops, it works for hops, definitely.
So I did the circulation thing, so then leave it for an hour to just settle. Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
It depends. I mean, I have left it for sort of 20 minutes, and it's still fine. But if you're trying to get crystal clear over, then the longer the better.
Then that first bit, do you just run that to waste, or?
What do I do with that?
Come on, admit it. You drink it.
Those live feeds are never a good idea. Probably maybe a half a pint I ditch, and then after, it's usually at that point it's usually just trub. So a little bit of that I don't worry too much about. I'm just trying to avoid hops as much as possible.
All right, thank you. Right, so leave it an hour. That's the bit I didn't know. I've been running it round, I think, after, and then just pumping it straight across because I just want to get it over and done with. Yeah. But just bugger off for an hour and just leave it to settle.
Yeah. I've got some pickies up of the kind of cones that you might expect at the end. I'll see if I can dig them out.
All right, thank you.
Lucas has joined us. Lucas, I think you got your camera upside down. All right.
Good one.
Yeah, that's 15 minutes.
Cool. Anyone got any other questions on news?
Lee.
Hello.
Who was that?
No, I just want to quickly follow up with Lee. So Lee, you chill first before you do the whirlpool. You chill your water to 17 degrees before you do the whirlpool, or?
Well, no, I'm not talking about trying to get hop extraction. I'm just talking about how you reduce the amount of trub and sediment that you're taking over. So if I'm taking hops out, then I'll reduce to, if I'm adding whirlpool hops, then I reduce to 85 and then stop and add them. But this was really around just getting rid of the trub. That part I'm not used to.
No, but I mean, because you have this immersion chiller, right?
Yeah.
So you chill down the water to, let's say, 17 degrees after you add
Yep.
the hops, and then you whirlpool, and then from now on you leave it for 1 hour or something.
Yeah. Well, I'm normally whirlpooling as I normally. What I've been doing is quarter of an hour before the end, I set the whirlpool off so that you're sanitising the pipework and sanitising the cooling thing in place. And then I'll turn the cold water on, but I'll leave the whirlpool going all the time because you get a much quicker cooling down, I found, if you do that rather than...
Okay.
Yeah. And then I guess now, take that out, 20 minutes more, and then an hour wait.
Yeah, I think I pump it out way too quick, as evidenced by one of my recent batches with like 6 inches of trub in the fermenter. So yeah, definitely leave it sitting there for as long as you can.
Yeah, okay.
Well, trub is not really detrimental to your beer, so if you don't have the time, don't bother. Just, it will settle out in the fermenter.
Yeah, I mean, the batch that had all that trub in it came out absolutely fine. It was quite clear and it's quite nice.
Frankly, the moment I'm finished chilling, it gets pumped straight into the fermenter, and that is it.
Yeah.
And never issues with clarity, even without findings, or health, or undetermination.
Sorry, sir. It reminds me of a brewlosophy experiment whereby they did a very trubby beer and a cleared one, and guess what the outcome was?
Let me guess.
No difference.
Yeah.
The trubby one cleared out quicker. That was the outcome.
Ian, was your point that you want to try and settle out as much of the hop matter as possible?
Yeah, that's the stuff I really don't want going into the fermenter. I mean, obviously the trub does. I find the trub tends to settle, but it never seems to get more than about, like say, 5 centimeters. You know, that seems to be the limit with trub. It's almost like, unlike the hops, which compress really quickly, the trub sort of sits there at sort of maybe 5 centimeters deep, and it just doesn't want to settle anymore. So at the end, maybe I suck a bit of that in, but it's the hops I'm trying to avoid.
Why are you trying to avoid that? Is that appearance or some transformation purpose?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's just one of those things where, I just haven't wanted them sitting in the fermenter for the duration of the fermentation.
Okay.
I'm guessing there are still tannins and maybe other things in there that you might not want. I know the trub isn't supposed to be an issue. I sort of well believe that, like probably everyone else. I've had some pretty trubby beers, but go into the fermenter and not had any issues. But I probably, hops. It'd be an interesting experiment to do a side by side, chuck some spent hops in. But
surely one of the main benefits of the whirlpool is, for example, if you have a plate chiller. If you have a plate chiller and you start pushing that trub and those bits of hop through, they can quickly clog up and they're able to get clean again.
I think that's where it comes from commercially, isn't it? As a lautering separation tool. So the idea is you don't have any filter in your whirlpool. They just run it through the whirlpool and then have a completely open takeoff at the side. So they can then run it straight out from there through the plate chiller and into your fermenter.
Right.
So that's commercially where it comes from originally. And it just happens to, the whole sticking hops in there simply came about because on a commercial scale, because it's going to take you an hour plus or longer to do all of that, the work stays hot for so long that for them it was similar to doing a 5-minute edition or something like that. They just put it in the whirlpool instead. Ian, can I ask, do you find any difference of whirlpooling between using leaf and pellet hops?
I don't use leaf. Because a bit like Lee, I think from what I gathered, I'm pumping out of the, where am I going? I've got a dedicated outlet which is fat enough to suck pellets and whatever. It goes through it goes through the pump and then back in. So the hops are spinning around, and I can hear them when they first go through the motor. When you the impeller, when you first dump them in, there's no way it would handle leaf. So if I use leaf, I'll either bag them or use like something else to hold them together.
I'm quite fond of leaf, but I've put a false bottom on the kettle.
Yeah, and nothing gets through that would. No issues with the pump.
I'm pretty new to the whole thing, but I've done 4 or 5 where I've tried to whirlpool, and I've not had any issues yet since I put the false bottom in.
That's exactly my experience with a false bottom on an all-in-one unit. I pretty much try to use leaf hops just because I like them, and I'll only go for pellets if leaf is not available and not a single clog.
Yeah, the nice thing about leaf is you can use the leaf as the bittering hops at the start of the boil. Then if you want to put pellets in later on, the leaf will filter out the pellets. No need for a
Yeah, it actually, as you're right, it helps filtering, especially if you're using a lot of hop matter, etc. So then when it settles, that false bottom creates almost a screen and another filter in itself. So that I end up with like sometimes even a centimeter of just gunk on top of that screen, which ends up not going into the beer.
Would you like to see my false bottom? So what I've done there is it's on little legs, as you can see, covers the hole at the bottom. But that is a tea strainer. So you get your hops settling on the main false bottom, but you inevitably get some finer stuff go through, and that tea strainer actually stops the rest of the finer stuff going through, and it just sort of makes a seal on the bottom of the copper, which is really good. Works well. Pleased with that.
Hold it slowly, Paul, without moving it so much, please. So the false bottom's continuous, and then you've got that on the bottom as well.
That is a false bottom with my little handle. Okay. It's on the outlet at the bottom of the bottom of the copper. That's just a tea strainer which I've put in place with a stainless steel nut and bolt there, and that tea strainer covers the outlet at the bottom. So although you might get small amounts of debris coming through, that tea then filters. Is a secondary filter.
Nice one.
And do you
got one of those in the mash tun as well?
Do you use that when you're just using pellet hops, or do you use leaf hops in there as well?
I use leaf hops is what I use generally, but this enables me, plus the fact that it's filtration. If I use the leaf hops to start with, I can then use pelletized hops. The filtration will take out the pellets, and what gets through is taken by the tea strainer.
Nice.
Very cool.
Cool, yeah.
So what
are you recirculating? Sorry, Mark.
What filters the pellet hops, Paul?
The whole flour hops, which you put in at the start of the boil.
Right. So you are still, okay. You only use pellets late on once you've got a filter bed out of some leaf.
Yes. Yes.
Well,
it works for me.
Considering doing that, of basically just always throwing in a handful of leaf hops at some point, just to act as a filter bed going forward.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I did before I got a whirlpool. I would always ensure there was some leaf hops in there for exactly that reason. Yep.
So I've done a Grodzicki with pellets only, and that settled out on top of the screen like that quite well without gunk ending up in the fermenter. So I think it's not just the amount of hops and what kind, but also your cold and hot break that contributes to that compacting. And obviously how big your the holes are in the screen.
So I think I've managed to share what I tried to do today, which is the false bottom.
Whose is this picture?
That's Lee.
That's me. So that's my attempt today. So the false bottom, and then did the whirlpool for probably about 20 minutes. It was only pellets today. There was a lot of trub, and then pretty much I just pumped it out straight after. So it's kind of almost right. You can see that it's caught most of the stuff in the middle, but
where does where's the liquid exit the kettle?
Below that false bottom. So if you see the thermal well, if you go down from the thermal well, underneath that false bottom, there's the same sort of bend as you can see on the top, but then there's a hose barb on that goes down and literally rests on the bottom of the pan. So, you know, it will take everything from a few millimeters up, and then I tilt it up at the end, so I don't have very much fluid waste.
Surely you don't need a whirlpool then, only for the purposes of chilling the work down. Because the whirlpool is designed to get rid of or to collect all the trub into the centre, and you draw off the work from the side. And it's the slowing motion of the whirlpool. As it slows, the solids tend to settle out, and that's what gives you the cone in the middle. And then the wort is drawn off from the side rather than from underneath. If you're drawing off from underneath, Lee, you don't need to do the whirlpool, surely.
Well, I don't know. That's what I'm asking, Paul. I think, to be honest,
I think you're right. You don't need to, with the false bottom. It's in fact, it's going to act as a filter for the wort anyway. So the fact that it's piled up in the middle is not really any advantage.
So I'm doing the whirlpool because it really helps the chiller.
Yeah,
and that's my question. So afterwards, should I do something? And I don't know. I'm hearing that if
I
you didn't have a bottom
whirlpool
plate,
for
then...
any longer than the chill. But your chilling will take you, what, 20 minutes, 30 minutes? And over that time, you will get a decent cone anyway. And I wouldn't waste energy to continue rotating it around.
Well, I think the only danger is if you've got an immersion chiller in there, that's going to disrupt. It's going to create turbulence in the kettle, and that you won't get a cone.
So what I did there was it was chilling with the whirlpool in and the chiller, you know, till it got to the right temperature. Then I took the chiller out and washed it, but I kept the whirlpool going.
Yeah.
And then I just pumped it out. So yeah, my question was, do I need to do that or should I wait for it to settle? So I think I'm hearing don't bother, just pump it out.
I would, if it were me, after you've removed the immersion chiller, all you've got to do is to just let it settle out. It's going to settle back. It's going to settle down in a bed evenly across that false bottom, and that will act as a filter for the wort running through. You don't need a cone.
Okay.
Because you're not drawing off the side above the false bottom. If you were drawing your wort off above the false bottom, you'd need a cone. Otherwise, you'd be dragging some of that off.
Yeah, but you might still want to give it 15 minutes to settle and create a bed. You want a bed, but ideally you want an even bed, really, because that's going to act as a better filter. So you don't want the cone at all.
But yeah, but I kind of wondered whether the cone would be in the middle and then all the fluid would go down the edge and it would be nice and quick. But yeah, okay, right.
Try it. See.
I've tried it a few ways. I've never bothered waiting an hour, so I'll try Ian's way and see.
And it looked like you've got a lot of the hot the matter in the middle there anyway, so it's just a case of then taking it off from the outside. And
I mean, that's the best it's looked today. I've done 4 or 5 times, and sometimes it's not looked like that. Other times I've got, one of the little scrunchy stainless steel things, and I've put that over the outlet as well underneath, and that's just got clogged up with trub, and that's caused problems.
Yeah.
I've stopped doing that.
So when you take the false bottom out, what sort of areas of rubbish are you left with underneath? Because that's probably more likely where you're going to be dragging stuff off, because the bottom underneath that false bottom is not going to have it's probably not going to get a cone at all, because you're not agitating that liquid.
I haven't been able to look at that, to be honest.
I'd just be interested to know whether you've got to whether it builds up anywhere particularly.
Anyway, Lee, you make fantastic beer, so you can't be doing much wrong.
Well, this is a new thing, Paul, so maybe it'll go downhill. We'll see.
Well, without being contrary, how sure are we that clear work into the fermenter is a goal worth pursuing? Like, is that something we should all be trying to do? Like, Doesn't it just settle out in the fermenter fairly quickly?
Mine tends to settle out, and I get shed loads of trub since I've moved to the Brew Devil.
Yeah, I've had mixed results. I've had some where it didn't properly settle out in the fermenter, and I've lost a good few inches on siphoning out of the fermenter into the keg and stuff like that. But the main issue, if you don't aerate well, the trub can act as a food source for the reproduction phase and gives you off flavors, right? Is it, if I recall correctly from?
I was listening to a podcast which had Charlie Bamforth on it, who's quite well known in the brewing industry.
Charlie.
And he was talking about, although in German brewing is kind of, you should have completely crystal clear worts, not have anything in it. He's done more research that says a little bit of trub is good, partly because it helps create nucleation sites for CO2, and knocking that out in the fermenter helps the sort of yeast carry on fermenting for as long as possible. I can't remember the exact details, but that was just sort of what came to mind about it.
Although he did say that Carling Black Label was the peak of brewing art in the United Kingdom. So
he did.
Now half isn't available.
Your system doesn't get rid of any of the trub, does it? Because
Can't hear, Phil.
Sorry, I need my microphone. Your system doesn't get rid of any of the trub, does it? Because it
system.
Does it? Because it's yours.
Mine. Oh, right.
Yeah, because you boil and ferment in the same vessel.
That's right, I do. Yeah, so what the hell do I do? But I just dump out anything which settles after the boil.
Yeah.
What Phil means, that what he's saying there is that the system I have, I boil in a vessel, in a big conical, and then I ferment in the same thing. And I mash in it as well. So so what I can do is I can just drop all the gunk out the bottom port as I'm going along, as I see fit. So what you're talking about, it doesn't really affect me, but it's interesting to hear all the same about what it all means for you. And I sometimes wonder about how much do I want to get rid of, dump out of the bottom port? How long do I want to leave it? Sometimes I will get about 2.5, nearly 3 litres out of the bottom there until I'm satisfied that I've got the really thick, gunky stuff out of the way. But it could well be that I shouldn't really need to bother doing that to such a degree, and I'm just wasting. I'm wasting beer. I might try it out, just leaving it all in there one day and see if it makes any difference.
Hey Mark, I was told that you just lay under the tap and you drink it from the vessel as well, right? Is that right? Just
yeah,
one vessel and you're done.
You've heard that from several sources.
I'm lucky enough to have a conical fermenter. So when I've dumped into the fermenter, say 24 hours later, I can just dump off the small portion of trub at the bottom anyway, which means that I don't really care that much about transferring it over, because it's going into the very bottom of a small cone. Well, basically into the sort of pull-off port. You're only talking sort of a couple 100 mil maximum, and I just dumped that off at 24 hours later. That is one of the advantages of a conical.
Too right. Yeah.
So I've not been doing that, and I end up at the end of the brew, once I've bottled, etc., and all the washing, I get say roughly an inch of trub at the very bottom of the conical. So yeah, that's about 100 to 200 mils, and then like good 3 inches of yeast on top.
Right.
And I don't do absolutely anything to deal with trub, aside from running the whirlpool to chill, for which takes about half an hour. So anecdotally, I've not noticed any issues with just not bothering with this step. I don't know if it would make more difference on a bigger system. For example, Mark brews what, 60 odd liters at a time. You know, I do 20-ish.
Well, I assume that the trub goes to the bottom first anyway. So once you've started fermentation and you're starting to produce dead yeast cells, that gets covered up anyway.
Exactly. It's always very clear cut, very layered.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, when I pour off from my conical, the reason I actually pour some off initially is that the trub was one of the conicals. It's got a very small port at the bottom, too small really, and it can get clogged with the trub. So I always pour that off first, so that when I come to pouring off the yeast, but the yeast, you can see the layer. You get a green, darkish green layer of trub, and then when you start pouring through the yeast, in fact, the yeast itself goes through colour changes depending on its.
Well, as it gets younger and younger towards the top.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like Scarborough Beach. Anyone got one of those things where you get the old, looking at the sands, all the colours through it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Isn't there a similar discussion to be had with mash recirculation? Some brewers online seem to want to get their mash absolutely crystal clear, but I've always gone by the principle you only really need to get out the grain debris. You'll never get, there's no need to get a totally crystal clear mash. What does everyone think about that?
Richard has set his house on fire. There's smoke
Oh
coming.
yeah.
Really?
Barbecue time.
Well, Paul, I used to be really like concerned about it before, about like getting clear wort. Now I don't bother. I do recirculate, so if it comes out clear at the end of the mash, great. If it doesn't, oh well.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, I do tend to find, like, I don't try to get clear wort in the mash, but I find that when I do get it, the beer is better. I don't know if that's just like a availability error or something like that, but it does seem to be.
Can you put your word on your finger on the word better? What does that mean, better?
So it comes out how I want, generally speaking, kind of thing. Like my best beers that, yeah, I don't know how you. I can't put exactly on better, but you know when you get a batch and you're like, yeah, that's it. Most of my batches aren't like that. Most of them are like, yeah, I'll drink it. I will drink it.
Rob, are you sure there is causality between those two things?
No, I'm not definitely sure. No.
Coincidence.
But you know when you've done a brew day, you're like, yeah, I think this is a good one, kind of thing. I think it's part of that.
Every time until 3 weeks later.
yeah, when I give it an infection going into the bottle or something like that. Yeah, there are many ways to cook it up.
Oh, this time.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
I guess deserves side by side as well.
I guess if you manage to keep out as much of the stuff that you don't want in the end beer outside of that beer brewing process, I think it's just better. If you can manage to do that, it's fine. So yeah, the same goes with the mash, and then if you can manage to leave as much stuff as possible at each stage, I think, yeah, it's going to be better for the end product.
Right. And is always a case that hop matter in particular is something that you would always strive to not get into your bottle or your keg? There's something particular about hop matter.
I'm guessing that it probably continues to affect the beer in some way, so you're not keeping control over your process so much. Like talking about carrying something over to the next process. If you carry a lot of trub over, then depending on what that is, if you've done a really hoppy beer, then there's going to be a lot of hop matter there and trub and so on. I think that probably by chopping it up into little sections where you sort of know what's gone into that bit. I'm just wondering whether with hop matter that it continues to affect the beer, but because it's hanging in the hops particularly, they don't hang around well. I mean, some people talk about dry hopping for a maximum of 3 days before you get odd effects and so on. So I wonder whether it's just that.
I do know that whenever I've seen particles of hops in bottled beers, those beers have not been good.
Someone did an experiment once many years ago, I think I seem to recall, and took a number of bottled beers and put a hop pellet in the bottled beer.
Ooh,
and when they opened it, it was like a bottle bomb. And all of those hop pellets, the particles, create nucleation points, and you get a gushing beer. So the idea, surely, Mark, is to keep hop matter out of bottles and kegs. Hop matter, I don't know about trouble.
Yes, they would be.
That was at the Wenlock, wasn't it?
When you sorry, I was just about to say, when I dry hop, you get an increase in CO2 production just by chucking the hops in, because it creates nucleation points, and I get a spike on my my tilt. Well, it's an ice spindle hydrometer when that occurs. So you get this weird effect where by dry hopping, you're creating a load of nucleation points. And in fact, going back to the Mylar balloon fills significantly after I've dry hopped with CO2.
I'll tell you
Is
what.
that instantly?
But over 12 hours.
Because the other thing that they've found out now is there's enzymes and that in the beer, in the hops, that then break down more sugars to give you more fermentation. So it may not be a nucleation point. It may be that you're producing some more sugars for fermentation as well. That's what I was asking instantly. So
it's pretty quick, which leads me to think it's nucleation points, because I use this ice spindle, the hydrometer, which sits in the beer, and I'm just wondering, because it produces nucleation points, it gives a little tilt. It gives more of a tilt to the digital hydrometer, because bubbles are sticking to that, and so you get this very odd little blip as it occurs, and it goes away after, say, 12 hours. So I'm leading to believe that it's actually nucleating, creating a load of CO2, which sticks to the side of the ice, where the ice spindle tilts a little bit out of kilter. 12 hours later, when they've gone, it goes back up to the position it was in.
Oh, can I join on that point about the nucleation aspect of it? When you got your beer in a fermenter, it's going to be typically at about 0.9 volumes of carbon dioxide. Do you reckon that knocks it out? So you well, it must do if you're saying that they form nucleation points. So you're going to end up with a lower carbon dioxide quantity within your beer prior to bottling.
Well, I'm wondering that, but of course, gathered with the fact that you're probably adding something to it, because the hops themselves have got something that's going to produce CO2.
All right.
So it'd be interesting to know whether those cancel each other out, or which ones are more likely to do.
The thing is, with this dry hopping, it's actually a very complex process, because to your point, you add the hops, it nucleates, it strips off the CO2. But also, there are some enzymes that further, it's called hop creep, where you have a further attenuation. And also just the fact that you introduce oxygen into your beer reactivates the yeast a bit as well, without even the hop creep. So you generate some CO2 as well.
Right.
There's a lot of effects going on at the same time, you know.
Yeah. I've read about this hop creep being particularly because I'm interested in New England IPAs or the West Coast IPAs, where you're putting an awful lot of hops in.
Yeah. But even without a hop creep, you're introducing a bit of oxygen, which can reactivate some of the yeast as well.
Right.
So to the question of Lee, how much CO2 is being stripped and regenerated? I think it's a very difficult equation, to be honest.
I've now taken to chilling down to 14 degrees before I dry hop to try and avoid the hop creep, because I was finding that I was getting over attenuation and the beers were just drier than I wanted them.
Yeah, no, indeed. Yeah.
Nice one, Rob.
Shaving, Rob?
Yeah, is that your entry into that competition?
Well, yeah, yeah. It's actually really nice, but
Surefire winner.
Yeah,
you can get to it.
But that was going to be another question if we're doing questions. Does anyone have any experience balancing keg lines in a kegerator?
I thought you were going to say, has anybody got a straw?
Yeah.
Funnily enough, Rob.
Yeah.
Somebody who's going to do a talk about that.
Talk about that.
Hey, good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Shall we do James's talk then?